Hello and welcome to the Hypertrophy Odyssey chapter.
462.
It is the second day of the week, aka the Spirit Bomb workout. I'm feeling very good right now, very excited for this workout. But anyway, to the main subject matter for today, Good and Evil Part 9, The Snake. So the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because in the Bible, we have the snake, obviously, as one of the biggest, I would say, foibles for mankind in a certain sense, where it is being used as the allegory for the devil in theory, and the apple of knowledge being brought to Eve via the snake. So I wanted to look at that, but not only just that, but the representations of snakes in general and how they are always representative of evil, or in some cases, the never-ending cycle. See the Ouroboros, which will probably get its own video, but the interest in snakes nonetheless, as well as a quote that I saw earlier today where it said something along the lines of "the snake that can't shed its skin perishes." So it's a very interesting dynamic, specifically because that could be used in a lot of different ways, specifically in people, where if you don't grow, you're going to die. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at that and how interesting it is that the snakes have always been one of those things that have been the fear that is underlying for a lot of people. Some people, I don't necessarily hate snakes. I'm not necessarily a fan of them, but also at the same time, there are people who are deathly afraid of them. They'll even recoil at the fake ones, you know? So it is something that is hard-coded in many of us. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at that and how it truly does represent one side of the coin and how it's always been there, and maybe a few other things that go along with that when we get to Mother Base.
All right, so started this day off with squats, which are pretty good. But anyways, back to the main subject matter for today. Good and Evil Part 9, The Snake. So the main reason I want to discuss this is because I think that I was watching something where somebody called somebody a snake, and then it made me like kind of have like a brain blast where I was thinking about, oh yeah, when people are seen as evil, they are be called the snake, which is the very first incarnation from the Bible of in which we see what is quote unquote evil, as the snake is what tempts Eve. Well, snake dressed up as the devil, or the devil dressed up as a snake, tempts Eve with the apple of knowledge. And I think that that is probably where some type of mythological idea of where snakes are not good for us, but not only that, as well, a betrayer as well to humans, but as well as we are hard coded with it. It's one of those hard coded fears that we ended up getting, inheriting from our genetics, to the point where it's something that most humans experience and or deal with. I don't think that everybody is afraid of snakes, but it is a normal thing to be afraid of snakes. It's not necessarily that next level. I think that it's pretty common. And I think that it, because of the fear that has been hard coded in us, we kind of innately get that snakes aren't good for us. But it is an interesting idea because at the same time, there are things like the medical rod from in medicine that always features a snake, but it's in the context of what the quote I said earlier, where it was the idea that the snake that can't shed its skin perishes, which is another interesting insight, because that's how it is used in the sense of medicine. Now, of course, depending on who you talk to, certain people will say the use of medicine and or the idea of medicine isn't even inherently good to humans, but that's a little bit quacky, and I'll talk about that maybe another day. But I think that the symbolism behind the snake itself is very fascinating, that we have had it for such a long time and now is in basic vernacular. Whenever we discuss somebody being a betrayer, they are the snake, the person hiding in the grass, the person that you don't see coming, you know, the one that blends in, that all of a sudden attacks, the one that might have been your friend but then all of a sudden becomes your foe. And I think that symbolistically wise, it's very interesting that we go to that serpent for a lot of different things, because they could be any other type of animal, really. You know, we could come up with another type of betrayer and out in the wild thing that would want to eat us or hide and all of a sudden attack us. But the snake, the slitheriness, the innate fear that many people have of it is such a good way of showing a betrayer than anything else. And it's just fascinating to me that it is one of the ultimate representations of evil in most contexts. Like I said, the medical field, it's very interesting that they would use the snake, but they use it in the shedding way. But it's also interesting because then that makes you wonder about more of the medical fields than not. But I'm not going to sit here and say I distrust the medical fields, because I don't. It's that they're there for a reason. It's more just interesting in the healing factor that they take from the snake, and not necessarily what they represent in the totality of the world. Because if you look at it like that, a lot of the time they represent evil. And I think that when looking at something like evil, where snakes aren't inherently evil, I mean, they're just snakes, they're animals who are living. People will put that evil upon them, even though they have done nothing truly to deserve it, except for our personal fears about it. And the fact that they may kill people, of course, but also if you leave them alone, more likely than not, they'll probably also leave you alone, just like any other animal. So fascinating that this is just how we have seen it since the dawn of time, and we'll continue to see it. I think that more likely than not, it's never going to go away. Do I think that it is unfounded? No, I do believe that there are some reasons why something like this would be so ubiquitous. Cultures see the snake as something that is to be reckoned with, as an enemy of the man, and is something that is, quote unquote, the evils of the world, to inflict pain upon others, but also pain amongst each other. That's really the most interesting part to me about the snake, the evilness that it represents to people, how they'll easily call someone a snake whenever they do something that they feel is a betrayal to them. And this goes back to so much of like the things like the Bible, where people won't want to connect it to the Bible because then if it starts getting religious, but in reality, that's where we would get something like the idea of the snake being evil, is something like the Bible. I think that culturally speaking, the duality of the serpent has been a very fascinating and broad topic, especially because depending on the cultures, they can be seen as something that can be good. But here, colloquially, as well as in the Judeo-Christian world as we live in, generally speaking, they are seen as evil representations of the world. But it is interesting that we default to that evil view of the serpent. And eventually I would like to talk about the Ouroboros and how that is a whole representation of possibly evil, or the cycle. But we'll talk about that in a different episode.
And we're back. Welcome to the workout debriefing. Exercises not filmed, none. Exercises skipped, also none. I got everything in, thankfully. But anyways, to the main subject matter at hand for today. Good and Evil Part 9. Snakes. So like I said, the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because I saw that quote today about snakes who cannot shed their skin perish. And I think that that is a very interesting way of looking at it, because I always find myself going back to the idea of Adam and Eve really being the basis of what good and evil is coming to. Not necessarily everything, but also at the same time, there is something to that story that is of the broader scope of things. I think that the idea of of nature kind of the evils of the world shown through the snake, and how the snake has been a prevalent thing in many cultures, representing different things, but also at the same time usually representing an evil which we cannot really control because it's always there, it's ever present. But at the same time, technically snakes are just animals, really. You can just leave them alone and there you go. But if you ever cross one, or you, God forbid, step on one, that could be the end of you. And it's very interesting because we are hardwired, I think, innately to not like it. I mean, to distrust snakes. And even when talking about people, when we call people that are backstabby, the ultimate, the ultimate betrayal, as looked in the series of the 7 deadly sins right here, betrayal and regret. We look at the innermost circle of hell, which is the ultimate betrayal, or Judas and things like that. The ultimate betrayal against another person, or against all good. So it is interesting that we go to the snake as the betrayer, as displayed within good and evil. And I think that that's very interesting and very common. I think that most people understand it. It's not necessarily even just a, like colloquialism. I think everybody understands innately that for some reason, whenever somebody is the traitor, they are the snake. I think it transcends cultures too. So it's a very interesting thing when looking at it that way, how the snake has always represented an evil somewhere, some way, somehow, even when talking about people. And when talking about the idea of backstabbing, that's what you call them, right? The evil that they represent in your world because they are doing something terrible upon you. And it's not like it's a very interesting thing. It is representative in all types of, popular media and all these other things. Snakes are always the evil ones, no matter what happens. Is that fair necessarily to the animal? No, but at the same time, there has to be something like that. One person has to become the bad guy, and that's as simple as a snake. And I think that it's very interesting when looking at it in different aspects, like the Ouroboros, where the snake eats itself, that entire concept, which I'll make a whole video about. But it's interesting that it's the snake, it's not something else. But then again, what else could it be? It's not the worm, but then again, it could be, but it wouldn't make any more sense. But I think it's very interesting just looking at it from the perspective of it always representing evil inherently, and we don't even need to go that for people to understand that. It's very interesting to me personally. Is it a good representation of evil? In theory, yes, because I think like I said before, we're hard coded for it. In terms of good, what would be the other side of it? What's the opposite of the snake? The bird, in theory, but that's kind of a different story. And also something interesting about the dynamics of good and evil when in representations of things is that we know representations of evil relatively quickly. If you read something like a Dante's Inferno or some other representations of evil, it's relatively easy to understand what is evil and who is evil rather than something that is good, because good gets a little harder than evil to represent and or to describe, And it's very interesting to me that even in modern day, trying to represent what is good isn't the easiest thing, because a lot of people will either resent the idea of good or try to move the goalposts as to what is good, which is something I would like to refrain from doing. That's why the entire point of this series is kind of about trying to figure out what are the posts and stick them there forever. It's obviously never going to be something that's going to be agreed upon or something that's going to be, able to be actually solved, because I think that the only real way for that to even truly come close to happening is if we have one universal type of religion, but that's not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's because one of the three groups decided to take out the other two groups. So yeah, besides that, I think that trying to establish one type, or at least an ideal of what is good and bad, is always probably the best. And it's interesting to me that the snake will always be the representative of evil, even in something that is mundane or gen pop. Somebody that isn't religious will understand that the snake is equal to evil. One of my favorite game series of all time is Metal Gear Solid, and in that game series, it follows all different types of snakes, because it's not just one snake, but three. It's interesting that two of them become evil, while one becomes, who isn't evil, becomes a bioweapon that can be evil, unbeknownst to him. So it's interesting that even when you are trying to escape your fate in that sense, the evil follows you regardless of whether you wanted to be there or not. So that's just a little bit of a motif of that game. But we're going to talk about that game. That game is probably going to get a whole series, because the second one, Metal Gear Solid 2, got a lot of things right about AI, and we'll talk about that in a different episode. But with that being said, tell me what you think in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions about this one. If you have any representations of snakes in different things, or just if you know somebody who's a fucking snake, or in popular media that has that motif, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with anybody who may or may not like it. I will be back on tomorrow with a new video. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you in the next one. Keep it heavy. Stay safe out there. Stay warm. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.